and the Early Years podcast. I'm Glenn Bennick. Now, I love it when a guest comes back, and I did promise in the last season that I would get this guest back again, and I have. I'm really pleased to welcome back from Pikler UK, Rachel Tapping. Rachel, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I'm really glad to be here again.
Oh, it's brilliant to have you. We've been having a little like catch up just before we started recording, but we were talking about sort of staff well-being and emotional well-being and kind of burnout as well. It's really prevalent at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. And I think, there are so many pressures on people who work in the early years, on the floor with the children, as it were, and also within the whole management structures and
Mm,
everything else. And I think it's very hard because of all the new things that are coming in and the younger children coming in, people having
mhm,
to accept more children, ratios, all of those kind of things. I think one of the biggest problems that I see is that people don't have the time to take a step back and
mhm.
think about how to maybe reorganize or to work out different ways of practicing so that they can take themselves into consideration. I mean, this is one of the things I talk a lot to practitioners about is how do you how do you put yourself in the picture and parents as well?
Mhm.
We're so motivated and inspired to put the children at the center of everything, which they really do need to be
Mhm.
on the one hand. But if we're not well emotionally and physically, how can we put the children in that position and take the care of them that they really, really need?
I think that, yeah, I mean, there was bits you were saying there, and it's resonating with me that very heart of everything we do, yes, there is the child, but then around the child is us as the key person or that close bonded person that the child has out with the home. And it is really important that actually when we're thinking about the child's welfare, we've also got to think about our own, because like you say, if we're not feeling 100%, then we're not giving 100% to the children in our care. And that's important. And I think we always forget that. Like you say, there's a high pressure day where we've got so much to get done. You've got your routines, but actually we need to slow it down a bit, don't we?
Yes, and that's actually a key Pikler message anyway, even just in way we are with the children, is to slow down. And I've heard people say, yeah, slow down and then slow down some more. I mean, it's like, and I think for many practitioners, particularly, I'm talking about, but I know this affects, everybody on whatever level you're at. Um, the idea of slowing down when you feel the pressure of having to do so much is the sort of thing which makes you just go, what on earth is she talking about? Because how can I slow down when I've got this many nappies to change, or
Mhm,
we've got a meal to prepare, or we've got um, lots of mess everywhere and we need to tidy up for the next thing, or whatever it is, we've got our routines, we've got our rhythms to the day, but there is no time. And I've got to take my break now and I've got to do this. And, there are so many pressures already that
mhm.
slowing down just feels totally impossible, really. And I think this, so I was just thinking when you were talking just now that when you're then faced with someone saying something like that to you, and it makes sense, that actually that would be the best thing to do for everyone. But, how do you actually make that happen? And one one thing that I one thing that I try and do for myself and for
Mm,
people around me is like think of what is the ideal. If I could start from scratch, from the bottom up, to, say you're working at, you're a room leader or something. If I could
mhm,
start from the bottom up, what would I want? What's the ideal for me, my team, and the children? And to sort of start from a base. Then looking at all the different areas of what you need to do in the day, the care moments, with nappy changing, getting ready for sleep, those kind of things. the meal times, and the going outside. What
Hmm.
would make life simpler and easier and enjoyable, and and give us the opportunity to really be present with the children, for the children, and for ourselves. And I think sometimes if you're able to step right back and create a picture that may have nothing to do with what you're currently doing, and you
Hmm.
may and to get rid of the idea of what's possible and what isn't possible, but
Yeah.
just to paint a picture, to have a vision of what you would love, then you've got something to work with, and you can then maybe start to make even just one or two little changes that will begin to give you hope. Because I think there is a sort of hopelessness I sometimes feel in this field, because there are so many pressures. There's not enough money, there's not enough staff. The staff keep coming and going. You start to build
Mm.
a relationship and then it's gone. All of these things, must make people feel like, they don't even want to get up in the morning sometimes.
It's right. I mean, I've seen, you hear about it a lot. Like it's always reported that, it's a constant, almost revolving door of recruitment of staff, and you're starting again. And I think you're right. Like sometimes I think the routines of the day need, to make it not easier for yourself because it's never an easy job, but to make it better for yourself is to almost start again. I mean, I was listening to you talking there, and I was thinking back to one nursery I worked at where I took over a room that was brand new. It hadn't even been open. This nursery had only been open just over a year, and this room had never been open because it wasn't needed. And I went in, and I was just told, "It's your room. Do what you need to with it. Build your own routine. Here's the key point of the day, lunch. Here's the other key point of the day, tea. The rest of it's yours." And that's what I did. We built in bits where, we knew our children needed to have a sleep, and that came after lunch, and this is what we would do. And then because they would all be asleep, this is when we could update our observations or put our messages out to parents because, it only needed one of us to monitor all the children. So there was things like that that actually made the day a bit more manageable, and we could do our arts over there, and we've worked the design of the room round to make it easier so that wherever we were, we could always monitor the children. So it was a really holistic approach to actually making the day work for the children, but
Mhm.
for us. And I think that's the big bit that we often forget, that actually we're important too.
Mm.
The room won't function without the adults, and if the adults aren't cared for, that's a difficult bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so I was just reminded then also, because we're talking about well-being and how we do need to look after ourselves. Um, there are lots of different reasons why people come into childcare. One of the most common is because, well, there are two very common ones that I've come across. Um, One is that, well, my own children have gone to schools and I need to earn a bit of money, so I
Hmm.
thought childcare would be a good idea, or maybe especially if it's, say, a term time setting or
Hmm.
something. So you've got that reason, and you've got the reason, well, I didn't know what else to do. Um, or someone said, I went to a careers advisor, and I didn't know what it was, this or hairdressing. I mean, it's not as simple as that. And also there are thousands, probably millions, of people who go into childcare because they just are so passionate about
Yeah.
it. So I know I'm not trying to make a generalization exactly, but I don't know that people really understand always when you go into childcare. It's like so many roles, how really very important it is, and
Hmm.
how um how responsible it is. And I think it's only when you get in, you might love being with children, you might love playing with children, but until you're actually in the role where you are totally responsible for, what, 6 hours or something for these specific children who may be having a bad day, may be really missing
Hmm.
their parents. Well, I don't think it's really, I don't think it really kind of hits you. And it's a bit like becoming a parent. You think you look forward to your baby arriving, the baby arrives, and suddenly you've got this totally vulnerable being
Hmm.
that is yours to take care of, and you've never done it before, and you think, oh my God, what do I do now? So I think a lot of people come in with the best will in the world, thinking this will be interesting or fun or exciting or something, and then the reality hits of all of the things that you are expected to do, which sometimes don't feel instinctively like it's what you would do if you were given your own, people don't get to be themselves as much
Hmm.
because there are rules and expectations and all these
Yeah.
kind of things. Um, and I think those are the kind of things that begin to contribute to the kind of possible burnout that can come later when you feel like you're
Hmm.
constantly working, working, working. You don't really, you're having to do what you're told quite often in a situation where you may not quite agree, but you don't have space to say. There's so much that management can do to really, really support caregivers, practitioners,
Hmm.
educators in their role that would really, even if you can't change the way that your room or your setting is run, just being heard sometimes, being accepted for who you are, being
Hmm.
given the opportunity to share your own thoughts and ideas, your frustrations. And I'm not sure that always um, gets considered. Making time, you're talking about having time, say at lunchtime when all the children, or after lunch, sorry, when children are having a
Hmm.
nap, get to catch up with some of your paperwork and observations. And that's really important because otherwise, when's it going to happen? But also having regular opportunities to speak to a mentor or someone like sort of having a buddy system or having some other way of being able to really share and let out your frustrations, have a bit of a rant, or these kind of things are really, really important as well
Hmm.
for all of us as human beings. We need opportunities to really explore our own feelings and emotions in order to be in touch with them and not squash them and push them
Yeah.
down until you get to a point where, as I was saying, you don't even want to get up in the morning to go to work because you just feel
Closed
so,
in.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's important as well because, the different families that we care for, it's very, very diverse now. We have families from different countries coming in and, different types of families as well. It's no longer the
yeah,
nuclear family of old. We've got all different families from, single parents to, same gender families and, families with, you know, two different parents that live apart, all this kind of thing going on. And I think that's why it's important that we celebrate and make our unique and diverse workforce feel valued as well, and actually tap into those uniqueness and unique talents and things as well, that they should be allowed to be themselves, providing it's obviously appropriate for children.
yeah.
If you're a heavy metal drummer, possibly not. It might be a bit loud for small ears, but you know what I mean? It's like the uniqueness of our core workforce should be celebrated.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's such a that there are so many complex issues here to do with well-being because, we are more and more realizing how many people are coming into the workplace who have their own uh, differences.
Hmm.
Neurodiversity is such
Yeah.
a nicely now spoken about and open topic, which no one had really talked about at all when I was growing up, or even, and my own recent ADHD diagnosis
Hmm.
has really helped me as, in many ways. I mean, it hasn't changed much about the way I do things, but at least I understand myself a bit
Yes.
more. Um, but I think also, we have questions around, if a if a setting is inviting people with so I still struggle with the language, neurodiversity.
Hmm.
I never know what the right way of describing these things are. But supposing you're hiring people with, say, ADHD, for example, and they are a bit hyperactive, how do we support those people to be able to also still be slow and calm and do themselves justice in the role and
Hmm.
support the children and support each other while still having outlets for their creativity and their need to sometimes be able to maybe go and jump up and down outside, or to let go of some of these things. This is
Yeah.
a really, really hard, and for managers, I should imagine this is a massive um question for them, or it should be, a
Hmm.
question that, how do we fully support the workforce? Um, I mean, I have a colleague who, Christine Wilkinson, who that came up with a great quote, something that I now quote quite often, which is, "It's more than just a box of chocolates in the staff room. This is
Hmm.
not the way to take care of your staff. But because, as we were saying before, I mean, you mentioned in our chat beforehand about the new EYFS stuff that's coming in, and we have, you know, ratio. It, ratios are never really quite good enough. We could always do with more adults in the room. We
Hmm.
always come across settings where people say, well, I couldn't leave the room because if I went, I needed 10 minutes for myself. I knew I was struggling. So but I couldn't leave the room because then the ratios are out, and
Hmm.
there's just not, the resources are not there. So it feels a bit like we're banging our heads against brick walls when we want to support each other. We want to do the best for our children, but our hands are tied. I mean, it's a really difficult question, isn't it? But I I do, however, think there are things that nurseries, many, many nurseries could do to take some of the weight off
Hmm.
um, the caregivers. And I could have some suggestions if you're interested in what we actually try to do for the children, simplifying.
Yeah. I know. Just before we do, I was thinking back to when I was a manager, and one of my key focus as a manager, apart from, the intake and everything else and overseeing the curriculum and the thousand other jobs, but my main focus above all else was how are my team? And I
Mm.
know I wasn't the only manager to do this, like there's plenty of
No.
other managers that really, really do. I mean, my current role, my manager is exactly the same because, like I'm late in life being diagnosed with ADHD. And the first thing my line manager said to me was, how can we support you? What do you need from us? And like, wow, okay, instantly I feel supported. But that was what I did. I supported the team. I got to know my team, and any nursery manager who's not overwhelmed with paperwork and things like that will focus on their team and knows all about their team. And that was the bit. It's like if, one of my team was feeling a bit frazzled and just needed 10 minutes out, you're like, no problem, I'll step in. That's no problem. I'd rather leave the paperwork, whatever, I'll catch up with it at some point, sometime, don't care. I care about my team because they, when they feel cared for and supported, the instant well-being of the children becomes high priority for them because they know that I've got their back, and I think that was hugely important for me as a manager that I had their back.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's what's needed. And I think, I think managers are under just as much pressure, and they
Hmm.
also then need someone to go to. And it's having this sort of, the buck stops somewhere, but it's making sure that, maybe creating communities and networks
Hmm.
so that managers within a certain area as well, so that you're talking to people who are working in a similar geographical area to you, so are coming up against the same issues, maybe of whatever it is, deprivation amongst children, or being in a rural area where it's hard for, to visit place, or, do you know what I mean? Sort of having
Hmm.
local networks so that you can really just kind of have somebody who can call up and say, oh, I'm having a really bad day, or this has happened, or,
Yeah.
oh, I've had this really great idea. I wanted to share it with you. All these kind of things, having all of that. But I think so. For me, I mean, as I'm talking, I'm holding in mind this. So I run workshops at nurseries for
Hmm.
caregivers, and I'm always so very grateful for the practitioners to turn up.
Hmm.
These are usually settings that are open all year round. So they don't have inset days, they don't have half terms and summer holidays. So it's full on, and they're
Hmm.
giving up a whole Saturday. If you give up a set when you only have 2 days off a week, I mean they're not all full time maybe, but you know what I mean. When
Yeah.
you're on all week, you maybe have your own children at home or parents to look after or whatever it is, and you give up a whole day to come and spend with your team still. I'm quite in awe of them for coming and doing that. I mean, they don't have an awful lot of choice sometimes. We're doing this, you need to come. But
Hmm.
I am very grateful. But I have an image of a particular occasion where there were a couple of members of staff, and they hadn't attended one of my workshops before. They were both quite new to the setting. They really, really struggled for the first half of the day to even just sit down and just take the time to be in the space. And one of them did articulate to me eventually, because it was really it was unusual and it felt quite tricky to me because I hadn't come up against this before. They
Hmm.
were, there were some giggles and there was some having to get up and walk out of the room and things like this because one of them said to me, I'm not used to it being this quiet. I don't know what to do. You know, the it gave me the impression that during the working week, when they're at work, there's just stuff going on all the time. There's noise, bustle, hustle. It's just so busy and that's the speed that you're going at then. You're
Hmm.
constantly at that speed and not really being able to switch off. So coming back in on the Saturday, it was like, why is it so quiet? Why is it okay for me just to sit on the floor? Why is that? Why am I not able to cope with this? It was really, really interesting. And I think this is part of the issue for me is that the nurseries themselves are so busy. There's so much going on. And there's so much pressure on the practitioners that you're not just taking care of the children. You're setting
Hmm.
up activities, you're planning new activities. You're constant. There's a lot that in settings where there are um, pressures to constantly be trying to prove something
Yeah.
to someone who's might be going to inspect or ask you questions or whatever. That puts so much pressure on everyone to make sure they observe certain things in the
Hmm.
children, to make sure they can do this. We have to make sure they can do that. And this is where coming back to taking a different viewpoint, I think is really helpful. Um, Within my work, I've realized more and more that generally we take the view of nurseries as being preparation. We're always preparing the children for the next steps.
Hmm.
And within the Pikler approach, we talk very much about sort of being with the children where they are. So,
Yeah.
like you meet them where they are and you let them practice the skills that they already have, which then lead them naturally on to learning something else, the next step.
Hmm.
And in order to do that, if you can give them just the freedom of a lovely environment where they can really choose exactly what they want to do, then they really don't constantly need to be stimulated with new ideas, resources,
Hmm.
and everything. Having a just one, no, a room that they are familiar with, where they come in and every day everything's the same, so that when they come in, they can go and find their familiar favorite thing or the thing they were doing last,
Yeah.
do some of that, and then maybe choose to do something else. And within that, the practitioners then they're role is to just be able to oversee that, to prepare that environment, to look after that environment, but not to be constantly having to get tables out and set up this and then to clear all that away and deal with all
Hmm.
the mess and then do this. And some of the rather artificial things that, I mean, I'm speaking quite plainly here. These are not criticisms.
Hmm.
These are things that have built up again from this top-down approach of how do we prove this? How do we prove that? Getting rid of some of the ideas that we have to create crafts to send home to show parents that they've done
Hmm.
something. One of the things I really like is if I go into a setting and there aren't any um, very similar pictures all over the walls done by the children because
Yeah.
they've all been encouraged to do the same thing. Where's the freedom of expression? Where's
Hmm.
sure, have some art materials, but have them out all the time. Just have them
Yeah.
available. If the children are too young to cope with paint without making a huge mess, don't give it to them yet. They'll have their time when they are ready. If they're not don't give them food to play with because we don't play with food, we eat food. And then at meal times, you won't have so much food being chucked around, maybe
Hmm.
because they understand that food is for eating, not for playing with. The messy play is in the garden with mud and sand. And I know not everybody has a garden, so it's great to be able to find another way for children to explore different textures and all these
Hmm.
kind of things. Um, yeah, I feel like I'm throwing lots of things out here, but I think if we can simplify the rooms and create just a beautiful, homely environment where the children can come in, feel safe, feel loved, explore and play freely, it's simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but
No.
it's simple. And then caregivers can just get on with their job of taking care and building relationships and just being themselves with the children and not
Hmm.
feeling like they're constantly having to race around preparing, doing, meal times, like you say, are important, sleep times are important. Um, and anything in between that can be led by the children and
Yeah.
not have to have adults constantly feeling like we have to be stimulating, entertaining, and really using up all our energy on these things, which are often even frustrating for the children, let alone for us as adults.
It's about trust with the children as well.
Yes.
The adult sometimes needs to think, well, yes, I know I'm the adult, but actually I can trust these children to go and choose what they want to do. And it was kind of harking about what you were saying there to that holistic approach I was talking about, that
Yeah.
it's not just about the adults, it's about the environment as well. Was it Reggio that said, no, who was it that said that the environment is also the teacher? I forgot who that was now. It's gone right out of my head. But yeah, the environment is also important. That is an important factor of what we do. So having these lovely, like you say, the homely environments where the children know where things are, that's important as well because the children, if they're feeling a little unsettled, if they can go to something that's familiar to them and that gives them comfort, they'll go straight to that. They don't necessarily need their adult, but the adult is there and the adult is then actually free to come and support them if they need it, rather than being tied up with, like you say, putting stuff out and dragging children to come and do this activity. You know, it's about that child's choice and about the child's freedom to come and choose what they want to do, which actually will lessen the burden slightly on adults.
Yes, and I think again, there because of our top-down approach, so many things have been created for 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 giving children certain experiences, but they're not very holistic. Again, it's a really great word, and I think this is something that we need to maybe think more about is having environments, settings, nurseries that are looking more holistically at the whole picture. Um, and you have people who, you may be given, as if you're working for a setting that's maybe part of a chain, you may have a budget for bringing
Hmm.
people into the setting to do something
Hmm.
specific. And you've got to, at a certain time when all the children have to do some dancing or some singing or some sciencey stuff or something else. And whilst I totally respect the people who have created these approaches and these things that they're taking in, and I know sometimes it's their livelihood and things like this, I still think that it's the wrong approach because we don't need to be educating these children. What we need is for them to I mean, if you want to use the word, educate themselves by being able to explore the things that
Hmm.
interest them at a time that interests them. Um, and and so we're again, it's trying to step back and think what, when a child is of this certain age, what are they interested in
Hmm.
naturally? What can we give them in this environment? And also making sure that within, you children of say you've got a few buckets or something, and you've got some things you can put in buckets. You have to make sure you've got a minimum number of things, like five or something, so that if one child comes and starts filling up a bucket with, I don't know, bricks or
Hmm.
something, and emptying them into another bucket and sorting out some other buckets, the other child who sees that and is inspired by that also has enough buckets to be able to do that. So that you're removing this possibility of conflict because this child comes and takes all their buckets, and then there's this thing, and then you've got to intervene constantly. Um, I mean, there are so many questions about how we are with the children and how much we allow them to struggle as well with
Hmm.
dealing with their own issues around conflict and things. We step in so much
Yeah.
that children don't get to learn about these things, and actually then they are, um, what we resist persists. So the more we step in and try and stop these things happening, um, the more they continue because the children need to learn this. They need to work
Hmm.
out for themselves. And it's like, learning how to move. I mean, we've talked before probably about things like, the younger children who there aren't as many in settings when they're very young, but sort of putting children on their tummies before they're ready. We're doing things to children. We're propping them up. We're standing them up. We're getting them to walk. We're intervening so much in babies and toddlers and young children's lives in ways that use up a lot of our energy if we go back to that looking after ourselves, and at the same time are unnecessary
Hmm.
in that there will always be some children who will need a little bit of extra support or help, but sometimes that can be verbal or just a hand that offers something, or a person just smiling and saying, "Ah, I can see you manage that," or "I can see that's quite hard work for you." Or I wonder how we can do that differently. It's just being a presence, being that calm person who is just available, but not racing around doing, sorting.
Hmm.
There's a different kind of energy that I think we can bring to a setting and to the children, which actually opens everything up, um, slows everything down,
Hmm.
and creates a space for the children at the same time. So we're kind of looking after everybody by actually saying, do you need to be doing what you're doing? Or can you actually just sit for a moment and just see what the children are doing? See what happens when, I don't know, this child takes away the bucket from that child. What's actually going to happen? Do I need to step in and say you need to
Yeah.
share or blah blah blah? Or can I just wait and see what happens? Maybe
Hmm.
that child won't care at all and we'll just go on with something else. That's fine. Or maybe they are upset and I can observe that and I can say, "Oh, yes, you're a bit upset because they took your bucket." Sometimes that's enough. We children have their own feelings of what's fair and right and wrong and all of those things, and they also
Hmm.
need to learn how to stand in their own feelings and learn about their own feelings. Um, yeah, I feel like I'm sorry, I'm skipping from one thing to another. All of these things, I mean, it is again, it's a holistic approach.
Hmm. It is.
Everything is part of this feeling of sometimes stepping into a nursery and feeling like you're stepping into a whirlwind or a storm or something, even when the children are all happy. If
Hmm.
the feeling is that it's got to be moving and busy and bustling all of the time, again, that's not very natural, is it? I mean,
Hmm.
we need times of movement or times of busyness, but we also need lots of times to
And to be
process
calm.
and to
Yeah.
be calm and just to do nothing sometimes, both for the adults and for the children.
Hmm.
They don't need to be constantly.
I think
Uh,
that's it. It's like I say, it's slowing things down when it needs to be slowed down. Because if we're all rushing all day long, most nurseries that, the practitioners are working 10-hour days. And, if you're
Yeah.
rushing for 10 hours, that is absolutely exhausting. So you need to slow your day down by slowing the routine down. And yes, like I say, we need to have those moments where the children are rushing around outside because they need to be physical, they need to have those big movements, they need to yell and jump and scream and shout and do all of that because it's all built up inside them. But equally, they need to just have that calm atmosphere, and that's where it's important that we slow it down for us as well as the children.
Yeah. And I think again, just um, for caregivers who are, working 10-hour days and around all that noise and busyness all the time, it does something to you. It does something to your own emotional state. However, even if you're having a great day and it's all very positive noise and bustle and huddle and everything, I think it's and even if you can switch off when you go home, there's still not time to really be processing
Hmm.
what you're seeing, what you're noticing. I mean, the the one way to really help, I think, practitioners in this role is to make sure that they have at least once a week somewhere where they can go, where they can just say, actually, I really enjoyed this particular thing that happened. And I noticed that so and so did this and somebody else did that. And it was amazing to see because we need to value our practitioners as highly skilled adults who
Hmm.
are looking after the most important people in the world. Our children are our future. It's been
Hmm.
said many times. So there's that, but also they need to be able to say, I'm really struggling. I'm exhausted. Um, or I'm having a bad day. This thing happened at home, or I had an argument with my partner, or I'm really worried about my mum, or something like that.
Hmm.
They need to be able to let go of those things in order to be able to be in the room and to be with the children without bringing all that stuff along. I mean, from my parenting journey as well as some of my professional work, where you go into a space and if you're not emotionally okay, it can take the very slightest thing to trigger something within yourself. And we as caregivers and practitioners need to be able to really be in touch with our inner selves in order to be able to give that best to the children. And
Hmm.
and then in some ways, if all practitioners were given the emotional support, the psychological support that um, really should be given to all people caring for children, parents or caregivers, um, the world would be such a better place, and the environment wouldn't even matter so much anymore. I mean, children can play with anything. Anyway, they don't need toys. They don't need, they just need to know that there's an adult around who they can go to. So we need to be those adults. And in order to be those adults, we need to be able to look after ourselves. And if that means taking time off or um, resetting or having someone you can have a moan to, or, having someone who can actually, or, wouldn't it be great if settings all had, a psychologist they could have come round and have chats with the
Hmm.
staff from time to time to help them to get in touch with their inner feelings, their own inner child, or their whatever. These are the things that should really be there to support us all. But it's probably quite rare that that is available. So how do we create an environment and a team feeling and a team support that gives the opportunity for everyone not just to chat about what they did at the weekend or what they're going to do, whatever, but to be able to really go more deeply and think about themselves, their relationships with the children, their relationships with each other,
Hmm.
how to deal with their emotional states, without just sticking the box of chocolates in the staff room and thinking, oh, they'll be fine, or, taking them for a day out somewhere to go bowling. Lovely, but still not really dealing with the actual issues that
Hmm.
everybody has and everybody needs. Yeah, I mean, I want to change the world. Glenn. I don't know how to do it. But
We do. We need to. But
yeah,
Rachel, time has actually caught up with us. But
I
this,
bet.
as always, it's always fascinating talking to you. Absolutely brilliant. And yes, you're right. We're important as well. The children are important, but the adults caring for the children are also important, and we need to remember that.
Yeah.
So,
And I know we're out of time, but just to say the reason I've become this way about all of this and so passionate, as you can tell, even though I do go off at all the tangents, is actually because of the Pikler approach. I mean, there will be other things that will spark other people,
mhm,
but it has so inspired me to look into myself as well
mhm.
as how we are with the children. And it's just been totally transformative to me. So I just want to say that because I know people listening might wonder and might want to know how to find some of that for themselves. So maybe we can give them links or something. You know,
Yeah,
there's a
we'll put the
training
links
coming
in
up
the
and
blurb.
stuff.
Of
But
course, we will always. But Rachel Tapping, thank you so much for coming back onto Circle Crowd. It's been a pleasure.
thanks so much, Glenn. I've enjoyed talking with you.